Welcome to our book club that we are doing on social sanity. I am so thrilled. I'm Sarah Zylstra, and I'm so thrilled to be here today with Jen Wilkin, who wrote Chapter 2 on identity. Jen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's so good to see your face. Um,
Yeah.
that's so awesome. Can you tell me, we're going to jump right in, and can you tell me a little bit about, do you remember the first social media account that you ever got?
Yeah, I remember we had just moved to Dallas from Houston, and I was wanting to stay connected with friends, who I wasn't around anymore. And that was right when Facebook was launching. And so I remember a friend was in town and said, "Well, let's get you set up with an account on Facebook." And I put like so much information out there on my profile that I would never in a million years put out there today. But it was like, oh my gosh, this is a great way to stay connected with the people we had just moved away from. And also, I was thinking, gosh, extended family, this is going to be fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome. What was your favorite thing about it at the beginning?
It was that. It was being able, well, also, like, it was being able to keep up with people, but it was also just experimenting with a medium, and thinking, wow, what might be possible with this? And the whole idea of sort of broadcasting your daily life was new in everybody's minds, I
Mhm.
think. And so, I think we would all say, looking back, there were things that we posted in those days that in a million years we would never put up now. And I remember some of that, just like things that's like, why would anybody even care to know this about my life? But at the time it was like, I can tell someone, that I just ate at this restaurant or that I just was at Target. And so yeah, I remember really enjoying, in particular, being able to be connected to cousins, that I hadn't seen in years, or to grandparents, or aunts and uncles. And I would say I still enjoy that today. That's something that has turned out to be a long term upside to it.
Yeah, I can remember it made me feel less lonely.
Yeah,
Because as a stay-at-home mom, that was the most isolated I'd ever been.
yeah,
And so to just be able to like put the kids down and quick hop on Facebook and see somebody else's face, or be able to
hmm,
say like, this is a funny thing that happened to me this morning, and it just felt like just your friends saw it, so you're just writing to the people who loved you. Um,
yeah,
so then they didn't care if it was dumb or
yeah,
too much
for sure.
information. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, did you get on, pause, did you get on Instagram when Instagram first came out too?
I don't know if I didn't get on when it first came out, because at that point I was on Facebook and Twitter and just kept thinking, I don't need another place that I have to manage the content on. At that point, it had become more of a job than a, than a fun thing. So I don't think I was an early adopter on Instagram, and I can't remember. I think I got on there because Twitter had become so terrible.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about how you noticed, or like kind of the progression from those early days of happy
Hmm.
utopia to like, oh, I almost don't even want to log on. Like,
Yeah.
how'd that progress?
Well, I think for me with Facebook, it was like it went from being just a small group of people who I actually knew to being a bunch of people who I maybe didn't actually know and would never know.
Hmm.
People who were interested in what I was doing from a ministry standpoint, or people who were a friend of a friend. And the more diluted my friendships, my online friendships got, the less meaningful the interactions were. And then as the algorithms changed with Facebook too, I think everybody kind of felt this. It was like all of a sudden you didn't have control over whose stuff you were seeing, and that even diminished my interest in it even more. I wouldn't say that Facebook ever felt like it turned into an ugly place, other than like when I would blog, for example, for TGC, I would write an article and it would go up on TGC, and the comments got pretty nasty pretty quickly out there. I learned pretty quickly, oh, don't go read what the comments say. Um, but in terms of like my personal place on Facebook for my real life friends or the people I was associated with in some form, it didn't feel like it was an ugly or negative space. But Twitter did get that way really quickly. Yeah,
Hmm.
and I have to wonder if it isn't because, like, on Facebook, at least there is a more prominent face. Like, you see the face, at least a picture, a profile picture of the person that you're interacting with, in a way that you don't as much on Twitter. Twitter seems to me to be the one that's the most distanced from an actual image of the person that you're communicating with. I've often wondered if that doesn't shape the way that those communications happen in a way that's different than like Instagram or Facebook.
I think that's a really good point. You also know far less about the tweeter, right? Like
Yes.
you only get this much room to say about yourself as a tweeter. Um,
Yeah.
so you're right. You don't know them. It doesn't, they just all feel like faceless idiots whom you need to correct in a stern
Yeah.
voice. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So you wrote a chapter about identity, and the first thing you say is that we're built to be social. We image God in the way that we are social with each other. God, who is, of course, in the Trinity, social with Himself, but also
Mm.
social with us. And in some ways, we know technology helps with that because we can
Right.
see, like, I can see glimpses of somebody else in real life. I can see a picture of somebody at a wedding, or I can have those social interactions with people online. However, social media also makes us profoundly lonely, which seems like the opposite. Of what it's counterintuitive to what you would expect. Um, what makes that? Why are we so lonely on a place where people are gathering?
Yeah, I don't know. And I think some of it is related to personality and disposition because I've heard people report that. That has not been my experience of social media. And so I do think it has a lot to do with what stage of life you're in or how relationally connected you are in real life,
Mm.
by the time that you log on to Facebook, where you are emotionally and socially, I think makes a big impact on the way that you perceive or receive social media interaction and what you need from it. I think is a big piece of that too. And I don't think that we always log on to it with that question in mind, like what do I need from this today. Certainly not top of mind. And so then over time you can have this build up of where you have almost subconsciously been needing something from it that it's not capable of delivering to you, and that amplifies over time. And then you find that where you thought you were getting interrelatedness, you were actually just being distanced increasingly more, not just from the experiences of other people, but also from real life interactions on your own, just by the amount of time that you're giving to being on social media. Because we only have so many hours in a day, and so the more time you give to online relationships, the more of an impact it'll have on your in-person relationships, which I think I got into a little in the chapter as well.
Yeah. I think that's really good. And I think that's something we haven't really talked about a lot is I think it matters how old you were when you got your first
Yes.
social media account. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the older you were, the better off you are because you probably had built
Mm-hmm.
those relationships, those offline relationships. I think about the kids who are getting on now. I talked to some um, college ministry people, and the amount of the online life that their kids are on, college kids, is tremendously huge.
Yeah.
They're building all of
Yeah.
their identity through that, and all their relationships there. So, and I think it's harder not to be on it as well for a younger person because that's kind of where their marketplace of ideas is and all their social interaction.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's a mix among younger
Hmm.
generations, and so like I see my peers' interaction with social media, and then I see my children and their peers, their interactions with social media, and they're very different. I actually tend to think that there was an initial learning curve around this that people my age, in some ways, missed. We missed like what it was good for and what it wasn't good for. It may not hit us as personally as it might hit a younger user, but at the same time, we also believe it can accomplish things that a younger user would be like, yeah, no, it's not going to do that. And so, like, the way that I would express this would be people my age and older think if I go out there and state a political view, people are going to hear it and be changed by it. Like, my kids would never in a million years go out on social media and say anything about politics or even, probably their faith,
Yeah.
depending on what the context was of what they were using. And so I think there's like this over realized sense of what social media can do among people our age, because or my age, I'm older than you, because we just don't understand platform. And so for me personally, I already had platform experience with real live
Mhm.
platforms before social media platforms ever came along, and so I feel like I already had some awareness of what you could and couldn't communicate holding a microphone, and that's what social media is. It's a microphone for ideas. But my kids are like, heck no, I'm not putting out, like, I can use it for the things it is good for, and I can set it aside for the things that it's not. So in terms of communication capacity, I think they have more of a native awareness of what it can and can't do. In terms of the formational power, I think that people are my age are more aware potentially of the way it can form you
Mm,
than sometimes a younger person is, because in general younger people are not as aware of how their environment is forming them, and so this is just another learning curve in terms of how it's shaping them.
that is that's a huge point. Can we rabbit trail a little bit into your kids? Like, how
Yeah,
did you
I love rabbit trails.
Yeah, how did you handle as a person who knows that things form you, as a parent who's watching
Hmm.
things form your child, how did you navigate social media with them? Are there things that you wish you had done differently with them? Do you have advice? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm a little bit of I'm kind of the wrong person to ask because of the age of my kids. My kids were really on the front of the wave of this, to the point that there were like pros and cons to having kids at the stage of life that mine were at when all of this was coming online. Because so like 2007, my kids are middle school through early elementary, and that's when I got my first Facebook account, or 2008, I think is what it was. And so they were too young to have been able to have a social media account when all of it was brand new. But they were having to learn about technology just in general. What was the learning curve on technology? So we didn't have a lot of the controls, then
Mm,
that you can place on a device that there are now. And
hmm.
so when people ask me, what did you do to control, the access? We had a lot of very just mechanical ways of controlling it, because there were not ways within the technologies themselves to control access. So rules like you can't have a phone anywhere outside of the downstairs living room. No screens outside of the living room. It's stuff like that. Sort of those early first wave ways to accommodate the changes we were facing. So I don't know that I'm a good person to recommend or report on the controls that are now available, other than that I would say, gosh, you need to have them, right? Because just children are learning self-control. But we were having social media accounts. We did, when a child turned the age where they were able to have the account. Um, we helped them set it up. We talked
Mhm.
about best uses. But again, I would just say that I've actually learned a lot about how to use social media from watching the way my children use it. I think they're way more conservative in their usage than I would have been without that reference point.
Yep, that's really interesting. We're almost the blush is off the rose, right? Is how they, or however you say it, like, ooh, I think we're past the honeymoon stage of
Yes.
um yes. Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. Good advice. Did you have any kids who didn't want to be on social media?
Oh yeah. I mean, my I would say that my kids spend less time on social media than a lot of adults that I know. And again, but I would say it depends on personality.
Yeah.
Some of them enjoy it or use it more than others, but they were the first ones to talk about like setting personal limits on their
Mhm.
usage. I remember the first time that my daughter said, I've got a limit on, and this was before there were easy ways to do this. She'd say, I've put a limit on how much time I'm going to spend on it, and I only look at Instagram in black and white because it's less visually appealing if you look at it in black and white. And I'm like, I didn't even know that was a setting. So, but they had more top of mind awareness around just what it might be
That's right.
taking from their in-person relationship. Like that's what's fascinating to me. My kids want to write handwritten letters or have in-person interactions, and it feels like I'm like, are you just trying to be old-fashioned? And it's like I think there will be a little bit of a swing back toward, wait a minute, what have we given up when our communications are only through screens or at a distance? Be
I think
interesting to
that's
see.
super interesting. I mean, I think we're seeing the same thing with books, right? Everybody
Yes.
thought, oh, Kindles just burnt, like who even needs to print a book anymore? That'll be so old school. And yet today
Yeah.
there's more books being printed than ever. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting how that pendulum swings back, and we always think it'll just
Hmm.
keep going, but then it swings back to the center.
Yep.
We know that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, and you write about Eve losing sight of that in the garden when she wanted to be like God. And you talk about, everybody should read this chapter. You talk beautifully about the ways that we use social media to try and be like God, right? Try and be
Hmm.
timeless, to try and be um, immutable, to try and be omnipresent everywhere. These are the things that
Hmm.
social media promises to us.
Hmm.
And like Eve, we're right there taking up those promises. I want to ask you
Yeah.
about a different thing though, because this is something I wrote about in my introduction, and this is something that I've struggled with, which is when you're on social media, you are creating an identity for yourself. You're creating, like
Right.
day by day, you're creating kind of a reality for yourself. I don't know if you ever did creative memories, but it feels like that to me. Like you take your memories and you put them on a page and you decorate it really cute. And then when you look back at those memories, you're like, oh my gosh, what a cute,
Yes.
beautiful life I've had all these years. And you're sort of doing that here too. Like you're adjusting the way that you present yourself and the way that you see yourself almost. Um,
Yeah.
how is that dangerous for us?
Well, I mean, before we talk about the dangers of it, I want to talk about the ways that it can be not dangerous, right? So
Okay,
like you
yes.
don't want to have two versions of yourself, but creative memories is actually a somewhat triggering but also accurate way for us to talk about this. I never did creative memories because I was too lazy. But
That's a lot
we
of work.
are all looking for ways to curate
Hmm.
memories, right? And I think that social media, I think specifically Instagram gives us that opportunity, or anything that's more visually, shaped, is giving us an opportunity to curate memories. And I always think about how, like, I don't go back and look at the scrapbooks from my childhood and think, oh, my mom was intentionally trying to hide the ugly parts of our life, right? Like, I don't think that. I think, oh, look, these are all these happy memories from my childhood. And so I do think it's important in terms of like coming to social media from the right perspective to recognize that that is the social contract, right?
Mm.
When you log on to Instagram, you're not asking it to show you everyday life. You understand that like right now, I'm sitting in my room from a perspective so that you will not see that the desk next to me is absolutely covered in junk mail and the two coffee mugs that are on there from this morning. And yeah, because you know what? You don't need that. If anything, it's a distraction from what we're trying to accomplish with this
Mhm.
thing that we're doing here. And so I think that as long as we recognize, and that I think that's something I would say that the younger digital natives are more able to do, is they're not asking social media to tell them the truth.
Mm.
They understand that it is giving them a perspective in any given moment. And so the problem is when you don't recognize that, and then you have to either deal with disillusionment because you thought you were getting the whole picture of someone, or you end up utilizing it to make a version of yourself that you like better than the real version of yourself that can't be supported outside of a social media space. And again, I think this is like for me as someone who already had real life platforms, not just virtual platforms. I already had to run the math on this. It's like I'm not going to be two different people. That's
Mhm.
exhausting. It's hard
Mhm.
enough to be one of me. I don't want to be two of me. And the other interesting thing for me was that a lot of this starts to come into focus for me during middle age. And so I was already aware that me being adorable was not going to hold up. Like, I can't sustain that through 70, 80 years of life, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you turn into a different version of adorable when you're 80,
Yep. Yep.
but it's almost a condescending adorable at that point. When people call it bothers me when people call old people adorable. It's like that's a human.
Yeah.
And so how do I how do I inhabit a digital space in a way that is representative of who I really am, even if it's not everything about who I really am? And so I think the problem is compounded with our desire to be authentic, which
Mm.
is a good desire. But authenticity doesn't mean full exposure to every aspect of someone's life. And we would understand that just in normal human interactions. But I think when it comes to social media, we feel like the rules have to change. And again, I think if everybody is looking at a social media platform, understanding this is what it is and this is what it is not, then it's not disingenuous to post a picture of your coffee cup next to your Bible as though your whole day looked like that. We understand this was a moment in this
Mhm.
person's day. It's not disingenuous for me to, oh, let's just say, put a sweater over the actual stretchy clothes that I'm wearing to do an interview with Sarah, because it's serving a particular purpose and everyone understands what that purpose is. So I think that's where the education piece needs to grow. We need to understand it for what it can do and what it cannot do if we're going to have healthy relationships with it. I think we talked about this in the book, but like social media is morally neutral.
Mm,
That it becomes either a negative or a positive depending on the way that it's utilized. So, like a pair of scissors is morally neutral. I
mm-hmm,
can use it to open a package, or
mm-hmm.
I can use it to murder somebody, right? And so it depends on the user and the intent, and so that's what I think where we need to grow in our education. It's not whether to use social media; it's how.
Yeah. You know what's also interesting is made me think of like it's almost an emotional than a it's more an emotional, at least for me, more an emotional than a logical reaction to somebody's coffee cup and their
Yes.
Bible. I know in my head that's a moment in their day, but emotionally I'm like, oh, look how awesome their morning time
Mm-hmm.
was, right? And like, oh, I bet they sat down and had some super deep, awesome thoughts and like God really spoke to them and like, oh man, that's so I think the split for me is in my own between my head and my heart almost in how I'm receiving
Yeah.
that.
But I
How do
think
you
also the user has a responsibility
mm.
to not post the picture of the coffee cup and the Bible if they, in fact, had the most chaotic morning ever. Like, does the picture represent an actual interlude in your life, or
Mhm.
did you craft it just for the purpose of getting a response, right?
How do we make our hearts understand the logic of our heads? Like, are there guardrails or like, how do you disciple your heart in such a manner that it doesn't envy or judge like somebody else's Facebook page?
Yeah, well, you've got 24 hours in the day, right? And we become what we behold. And so
Mm.
if your gaze is more on social media than it is on truth, the truth of the scriptures, then you're going to slowly be pulled toward what you believe is the beautiful vision that Facebook or Instagram, I'm not going to say Twitter, I don't think there's a beautiful vision to be had out there currently, but you'll be pulled toward a false story of beauty. Um, if you don't have a grounding in the true story of beauty. And so you won't be able to properly identify what is truly beautiful in social media if you don't know what true beauty looks like as found in God's word. And so I'm not saying like for every 15 minutes on social media you have to have 45 minutes of Bible study, but I am saying there is some correlation between the amount of time that you spend meditating on biblical truth and the way that you process what you're seeing on social media. And if we want to be wise according to God's wisdom and not according to worldly wisdom, um, the level of forgetfulness around godly wisdom that is painted for us across the sweep of Scripture is deeply sobering. And for many of us, social media is a place where we go to forget on purpose. We want
Mhm.
to forget whatever it is that we're dealing with in our own lives. We want it to be, it's the lotus eaters. We want to eat the lotus. We want to sort of time out, and that's what we do with all entertainment. So it's not wrong to have interludes where you time out. It is wrong to crave them, to require them, and I think you get into those patterns when you are feasting on the wrong thing or feasting on one thing to an extent that it is inhibiting your ability to feast on the thing that is feeding your mind, that is shaping your heart into Christ-likeness.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's really good. Um, and it sort of leads into my next question I'm thinking about is you talk a lot about our mutability and like how we're shaped and formed. We are not like God who is immutable, but I mean, you can
Mm-hmm.
think about this through your whole life, seasons of your life that shaped you, teachers who shaped you, friends who shaped
Yes.
you, like events that shaped you, and certainly interactions on Facebook are also shaping you. Um, how does interacting with other people's creative memories is there something we should be aware of there? Like we know in our head these are all other people's creative memories. We're putting out our own, and yet we're shaping other people, but that's not really us that's shaping other people. It's our creative memories that are, and their creative memories. Like my interaction with you as a friend offline is
Right.
shaping in a real way. If we only interacted online all the time, we would think of each other completely differently and be shaped by each other differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to really think about who you're going to follow or who you're
Mm,
going to pay attention to. And I think you need to know your lane in social media spaces. So, like it or not, I follow into the category of influencer.
Hmm.
And some days I'm like, this is a privilege, and other days I'm like, how did we get here? But most of us don't have to be influencers unless we choose to be, unless we decide to angle to be that. And angle sounds sinister, just hear it for what I mean. And so it's not wrong to go, wow, this is a platform that I could utilize to draw people to my message. That is, people have done that through various media for as long as there have been humans on the planet. And so that's not, again, it's not morally wrong, but it's something to pay attention to. And so if you're a person who just wants to see home decor ideas or wants to know what someone thinks about a verse a day in the scriptures, then you can enter into social media. The contract can be very clear for you. And it means that the things that you post don't have to be things that are drawing people to pay attention to what you're doing. And then if you're someone who finds yourself out there either intentionally about how much time and in what ways you're going to utilize social
Mm.
media. But I think some of it has to do with identifying what lane you're in and then asking, if this is my lane, how many people am I going to turn my eyes to, and how am I going to utilize the space where I'm trying to turn people's eyes to what I'm putting out here.
That's really good. Did you ever think, oh no, I'm being shaped in a way I don't like by my social media?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I have to regularly evaluate whether I feel like I have to put something on social media or if I'm doing it because it was a natural expression of what was happening in my day or as part of my ministry. Did I feel obligated, or did I feel self-serving? Did I do it because I needed a shot of feeling awesome? You know, and again, it's you got to keep tabs on that. That's what we would do with anything that has the potential to be addictive or damaging, but also has the potential to do a lot of good. So you got to keep taking its temperature. And I think that's the main thing that we don't do is we don't have check-ins with ourselves to say,
I agree.
and it's not like, is this bad or is this good? It's, is this heading in a direction that's getting worse or in a direction that's getting life-giving?
Mm.
And to just do that, from time to time. And it's interesting because we've just entered in, at the time that we're recording this, it's the second day of Lent. And that's one of those easy built-in
Hmm.
times where you can go, oh, wait, do I need to do a gut check around some things? And a lot of people do it around social media. But I think if we had more of a year-round sense of, I'm going to take my temperature on this. What am I currently asking of this, or what is it currently asking of me? And is that a healthy thing, a thing leading toward health, or a thing leading toward unhealth?
Yeah. How do you take your temperature?
I leave my phone somewhere where I can't get to it for a while and see how I feel about it.
Oh,
Yeah. And if you
interesting.
feel that compulsion of, oh, I really want to go check that. That's usually sort of a warning sign to me. And then I'm a person who has people who want me to use my social media for their stuff, which is that's fair.
Yeah.
I understand that people have done that for me, but that means I also have to weigh like, who am I saying yes to? Who am I saying no to? What's my decision tree for how I make those decisions?
Mm.
And so it's things like that. Like, is it unconsidered or is it considered? I think is the way that I have to keep um, talking to myself about it. And if I don't, so in my case, like we've had a lot going on with our family lately, and I have not put a lot of
Hmm.
content out on Instagram. And I'll have a moment where I'll think, oh, what if people lose interest because I haven't posted anything? And then I have to remind myself, no, that's not why you ever got into that space in the first place. You did it because you thought it was fun and you were going to post pictures of your dogs there. And so if I still feel joy, the right kind of joy in doing it, then I should do it. But if I'm not out there for a month and a half and that makes people mad, then they don't understand the social contract. And maybe I don't either if it bothers me.
That's so interesting that you say that because I am not an influencer, and yet I can I can feel the same way of like, oh no, what if people are waiting for me to put something up there? But I don't, maybe people are waiting for you to put something up, but no one is ever waiting for me to put something up. So, and I like if I go there and my friend hasn't posted for a while,
You don't
it's not
think
like I'm
anything
like,
of it.
gosh,
Yeah.
Where's Jen? I've been looking every
Yeah.
day for a month and a half. Like
And it's
that's,
not that different for me. I mean, think how many people are putting content out there. Like, nobody, probably no one watching this is like, yeah, that's right. I hadn't heard anything from Jen in a while. Like, you did not notice. And that's what there's a lot of freedom in that. That means we can all
Mhm.
feel the freedom to say something when we have something to say and to be
Yeah.
slow to speak when we don't. The universe will keep going, even the social media universe.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's super interesting. How formal are your temperature checks for yourself, or do you just do it when you start to feel like, oh, it's been a while since I thought about this, or are there like red flags that you see in yourself that make you think, ooh, I better think about this a little
No,
bit?
I can't. I would be presenting a false version of myself if I said that I was formal about it. I'm not very formal about many things like that, but I have a lot of accountability to surround myself with because I know that about myself.
Yeah.
And I try to be, I try to be self-aware, and thankfully the Lord has given me plenty of work to do, and so I don't have typically long stretches of time to spend on social media. Now, let's be honest, we all
Hmm.
we all make time for the thing we love, right? I
Yep.
get in plenty
Yep.
of time.
Yep.
I don't mean to sound like a saint on any of this, but I work full time at my church. I travel and speak, and I'm an
Yeah.
author. So the Lord, I think, has
Yeah.
filled up my days with plenty of things that should require my attention to the point that I just, I have to. I can only be limited to certain amounts, which praise God.
I
Yeah.
know. I think that's true. It's just a healthier, I think you're right. Like to come to social media out of an overflow of something that you want to share and not out of a compulsion to escape, is the way that we have to approach this. The tricky part is, of course, we know this. Nobody's going to argue with that, and yet our hearts um, are still doing that. Easier
That's
said than
right.
done.
That's right. I will say too, I feel for people who are raising small children. I would not want to have to, like, my kids are out of the home, and this is probably actually not great because the modeling piece is not as top of mind for me as I would have needed it to be
Mm,
when my kids were small. And I think about just that pull that it has on you and how difficult it would be, not just to keep yourself from wanting to look at it, but to be so aware that there were small people who are being, I mean, deeply influenced by the habits that they see me practicing. I think
yeah.
maybe the Lord didn't bring social media along until I was older because He knew I couldn't handle it.
I know. I feel like I can't either. It's just maybe it's my personality. It feels addictive right away for
Yeah.
me. Like yeah, and it's hard for me to say like, "Oh, I was going to go on here and, say congratulations to somebody." And really all I did was come on here and scroll through what everybody was doing and totally forgot and didn't even say what I was
But
going to
I
say.
will mitigate that a little bit, that idea, because I do firmly believe um, that the Bible is not lying when it says no temptation has overtaken us except that which is common. So, whatever this pull is that social media has on us and on our time, whatever that compulsive feeling is, that is not new. There have always been ways to distract ourselves. This is one that is relatively uncharted because it hasn't been around very long, but it's just a new way to commit an old sin. In the same way that
Mm,
it's a new way to have to have an old positive outcome, like it's morally
yeah.
neutral, but the pull, the temptation associated with it is not new, and therefore there is a way out that's provided for us, just as there has been a way out for those who have lived in any season of human history. That's a comfort.
I love that so much.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is always like Jesus and go back to the Bible and whatever addiction or struggling that you're
Yeah.
with, like you have to start there and finding your identity there. Um, that's really good. Okay, I'm gonna rabbit trail one more time into your kids. What are things that you've learned from them about their, like looking at Instagram in black and white, or are there other things like ways that when you watch them use social media that would be good for people?
Yeah, I think that um, they don't let it fill every nook and cranny necessarily.
Hmm.
They're less likely to pick it up in a spare moment. They might have like a more set time of day where they allow themselves to sit down and look at it. And I'm not saying that all of this was a place that they landed at immediately. I think it's a little bit like when you set out a bowl of candy in front of a small child. Like my kids would have just devoured the whole thing, and then they learn, oh,
Yeah.
maybe just a handful is good. And so I'm not saying that these were ways that they began with their social media use. But the thing
Hmm.
that's fascinating for me is when they went off to college and they didn't have me hovering around like a harpy to make sure that they were doing things exactly according to my expectations. That they did seem to get schoolwork done. They had more of a kept more of a log of how they were spending time in terms of like, now I need to do classwork and I can't take a study break on social media because that throws me into a different headspace. But yeah, no, maybe we should have them on and interview them. I don't want to speak for them,
I
but my
know.
general sense is that they are less interested in it. I think they have a much better sense of what it can and can't give them.
Hmm.
And they just aren't as drawn. It doesn't have the power over them that I think it sometimes has over people my age. And I think it doesn't promise the same things to them that people my age tend to think that it does.
Hmm. Yep, I think that's really good. I think that's really good. Um, I think the important part of this always is as you write in your chapter, like remembering who you
Yeah,
are, remembering your own limits, remembering your own weaknesses, probably just knowing yourself. Are you a person that's going to be especially affected by seeing somebody else's beautiful
yeah,
house, or especially affected by seeing other friends out to eat, or especially affected by seeing somebody else's trophy, or like that's maybe also something. The
absolutely. I think like
the more you know
yeah,
yourself.
like all temptations, like there are some things that don't tempt me at all, and then there are other things that are absolutely my kryptonite. And when it comes to social media, knowing where you fall on that scale, how close is it to kryptonite? It's like anything, sexual temptation is the same way. Like for some people, it's a bigger problem than it is for others. The temptation to use alcohol in abusive ways, or drugs or something like
Yep.
that. Like you have to know
Yeah.
drugs is a bad example. Don't use drugs, everybody. Don't smoke drugs. Um, but there are things that can be harmless or even enjoyable in moderation. That as soon as you realize you didn't have the ability someone else did to control your intake, become immediately dangerous to you. And I do think social media can be that for some people. But it is not that for all people, and I think that's something like
Hmm.
even my husband and I in our conversations about it, he ended up getting off of Instagram because he felt the comparison thing in a way that I just didn't. So
Hmm.
I can respect that, but also he didn't say, hey, you know what, we should get off of Instagram because it's a bad place for comparison. And so, you know, now impose that on a middle schooler or high schooler who already they're so given to comparison just because that is the rite of passage of that age. And you can understand why this is something that we want to deal with cautiously among those who are younger or less socially mature. But for adults, we need to give each other permission to be able to weigh the strength or weakness of our time spent on social media, the impact that it's having on us from a formative sense, and to reach different conclusions, and to trust that it's a wisdom issue and that we want to
Hmm.
apply wisdom and with our own lives, and we want to think graciously about the way others are doing so.
Yep, I think that's really good. And I also think if you like during a season like Lent or another season, to take your own
Yeah.
temperature on it, and to think clearly about what you want out of it. Why are you coming here? That's super
Mm-hmm.
important. And maybe also to think, if I see people gathered together, and if I'm an Enneagram 7 and I see people gathered together, I think, oh no,
Yeah.
why did those people have a good time and I wasn't
Yes.
there, even though maybe they're not even close to me and I never could have gone, but I'm still feeling that about it. Like, just to be able to recognize in yourself, like, oh, let's move on to something else, or I can see that bubbling
Well,
up.
and to give a little grace, like not to be super judgy about when someone is on their phone, because like I have this running joke with my kids. They'll go, Mom, hang up and hang out, like if I'm looking at something on my phone. But then their other narrative is, Mom, if we're in an emergency, we're not calling you because you never see your phone. And so I'm like, well, which is it? Am I on my phone too much
Yeah.
or not enough? And so, you don't know how someone has structured their day. You don't know whether they're
Yeah.
using their phone for a useful reason or a non-useful reason.
Hmm.
And so yeah, maybe just withhold judgment until you have more information.
Yeah, that's
Bratty
just
kids.
good life advice right
Yeah.
there. Jen, I think this is all the questions that I have for you. Unless you have any parting knowledge you would like to share or wisdom on either identity or social media.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, I don't know that this is, the big punchline to the conversation or not, but identity is something we have to take seriously. And I do think that we talk about identity in Christ. A friend recently commented to me about how that's a relatively new way of talking about things in the church.
Oh, interesting.
The more common historical framework would be union with Christ. And I was like, gosh,
Yeah.
that is a really profound idea. I want to think more about. And it ties into that idea that we are not actually primarily supposed to be thinking about ourselves as individuals in a personal relationship with Christ. We are saved into personal relationships certainly, but into the communion of saints. And we have union with Christ. That is what undergirds that. And I think that one of the things that social media does is offer us, if we don't have the right lenses, offers us a false union um,
Mm,
that can draw us away from not just it's not just that it can present a false or a lesser idea of community. It's that it can remove from us an awareness of the preciousness of the most important community of all, which is the fellowship of believers who are joined in union with Christ. And so I just have been thinking about that a lot. We are built for community, but while we're built for community in a general sense, we are also built for community in a very specific sense. And so I think as we evaluate our social media usage, one of the measures that we should really pay attention to is how does my time or my interactions with social media shape the amount of time I have in actual face to face Christian community, but also shape my perception of what that community is and does. So there's a sense of how it shapes my personal identity, but there's also a greater sense of how it shapes the identity of believers in Christ. As those who are Christians want to use social media wisely. So I wish I had more specific ways to talk about it, but as I said, it's a new emphasis for me to think about, but it's something I want to keep meditating on in this conversation.
I am I am fascinated by that, and it's making me think, social media is about community, but it's really about you,
Yes.
right? You make your own page and you say what you say about yourself, and you put pictures, choose the pictures about
Yes.
yourself, and it's very much you
Yeah,
oriented.
certainly can be.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so, you can't really, it's not like you can go to a church or be even part of a school or an organization on Facebook. Like your own personal can be part of it, but you can't sort of, it's not the same as joining a
Right.
body. Um, yeah, you're not subsumed into something else, or you submitting to
Mm-hmm.
something else on there. You're maybe liking something or supporting something, but it's a collection of individuals more than a,
A community of
you
people with
know,
shared values.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
and I wonder if the extent to which we are able to utilize social media to be both of those things, both a place of individual expression and community building, if it becomes a more healthy and useful approach. I don't
mm,
know. I got to think about it some, but that does seem like it would be intuitive because that is the dual emphasis I think that we see in the scriptures is God sees individuals, humans. He knows my name.
mhm.
He doesn't just see a great cloud of witnesses. He knows Jen Wilkin. Uh, but there is the great cloud. There is the church universal, historic and current, um, and so if I can utilize social media in a way that is honoring both aspects, it seems likely to me that I would be using it in a healthier way, in a more human way.
Yeah, I love that. I wonder what that would even look like.
I mean, I think it's are you as an influencer, I look at it as am I connecting people who wouldn't otherwise be connected to shared ideas? To
Mhm.
I mean, it actually feels kind of almost easy as an influencer who has access to orthodox ideas to give to people and say, hey, look, these are the things we share. These are the things we share. These are the things we share. But at the same time, I own pugs and I'm ridiculous and I like to garden and and I think those are I think I hope that there are ways to do that that are edifying to the Big C church. But I
Yeah.
hope that those efforts don't draw people away from understanding the beauty of the Little C church, uh, or even, gosh, now we're down a rabbit trail, or even that they would be more drawn to messages of people like me who are outside their local church, to the
Mhm.
point that they
Mhm.
don't seek out um, spiritual mentors or voices of influence who are embodied and in their local congregation. I want to be an add on to that, not a substitute for it, for sure.
Yep, and that's such a tricky thing because, gosh, don't we feel like we know those
Mm-hmm.
influencers because, you know,
Mm-hmm.
your friends know that you love pugs and your friends know that you're ridiculous, but now, like, other people, it's like a friend level thing to know about
Yeah.
somebody. Not that it's bad at all to share, but it just makes, I think, for a lot of people, feels like, oh, I'm friends with
Right.
her and like I trust her and I like her so much. And if you're giving an orthodox message, that's one thing, although it also I follow Paul, I
Yeah.
follow Apollos. I think there's like that
Right.
danger too.
Right.
Oh,
Boy,
um,
we solved it all,
sin
didn't
and
we?
redemption all over it.
I think we raised more
I
questions
don't
than
know
we
that
answered on this conversation.
I know it's like I don't know we didn't don't think we moved the ball at all, but at least we had, raised a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I do think it's important, even just to think about little things like what am I, what's going on here? How am I being shaped by this? How is this making me think I'm somebody I'm
Yeah.
not, or how am I thinking other people are something other than they're
For
not?
sure.
Um, it's important. Jen, thank you so much. This has been really, really fun and
Yes,
interesting.
really fun. And I'm super excited about this book getting out into the world. Thank you for all the work you've done to pull it together.
Yep, you are welcome. I'm so thrilled for people to be able to read it and hopefully somebody else will have lots of other good thoughts as they're reading it and they can keep
Keep
teaching
the
us.
conversation going. Absolutely.
That's right.